Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this week's edition of Fake Accents Unite. Goodness me, there's an awful lot of you waiting here, over 100. That's, I think it must be something somewhat verging on a new record without a big guest on. Unfortunately, this evening,
What do you mean without a big guest on?
without a big guest, we're always the guests on Britisher. As you can hear, I'm joined as usual by the Britisher. Nice
Good
to see you
evening,
this
everyone.
evening. Good to see you. Please tell me in the chat whether or not you can hear buzzing in the background or basically a whispering whilst I'm talking. I have put a noise gate on, but we'll see how that goes.
Well, you'll be happy to know I can't hear any buzzing, and I could hear it last time round.
Well,
So
that's
so
something, I
far in the
suppose.
pre-chat, I have not heard any buzzing.
Well, we shall see. We're also joined this evening by Binary Surfer. Good evening, sir. I see an unmuting, but I hear nothing.
No, it's complete silence at the moment.
Feel free to spend a little bit of time setting up your microphone, Binary. Otherwise, you'll simply have to be a silent observer.
So can I kick off proceedings with one vitally important question?
Go for it.
Always given what our first ever subject for our first ever Fake Accents Unite was.
Tea.
Did you see Boris Johnson be interviewed on his tea making?
I did, or rather, I saw him walk around an office, then make tea, then get told that the entire rest of the interview was invalid because he put the milk in over the top of the tea bag and then let it stew.
Mm-hmm. Yes, stewed tea and all that. So the tea controversy. We are now that far into La La Land when it comes to the entire election process that how Boris Johnson makes tea is apparently of significant importance.
Oh, indeed.
Can you hear me now, by the way?
Hey,
Yes, we
we can.
Excellent. Yep, sorry, my microphone randomly lost its settings.
Good evening, Binary. Nice to see you. We are also expecting a Sarah this evening. Zarathustra, a daughter of Albion, whose channel has taken off these past few weeks. But unfortunately, I've had no messages back, despite arranging this all yesterday to try and avoid this sort of thing. So we shall see her when we see her, hopefully. But yes, how are you, Binary? How's your day going?
Not bad, very busy. 12 hours straight work today, but otherwise...
And you've just cut out, I'm afraid, mate.
I say 12 hours straight work today, but otherwise good. Busy one, but good.
Not too bad then. A few things have been popping up in the media recently, but before we get to that, I will just deal with the first couple of super chats naturally coming in. So the Invidious has donated £2, says 356.11 seconds late. I'm filling in for the Dane. So thank you very much for that, Invidious. Someone has always got to let us know how late we are at the beginning of these streams. And Mighty Balzac, $2 says Britisher is the dread and envy of them all. I assume he's referring to guests in that case, unless I'm missing something terribly here. An Architect of Fates wants to get in early as well and says for $5, thank you very much. A 20-year-old Britisher was banished to the continent by Albion when she heard his thoughts about her daughter. Is this true, Britisher? Did you spend a time in exile due to impure thoughts that you were having about some daughter of Albion somewhere?
Well, I mean, one might be able to argue that I spent some time in exile, but it wasn't because of any impure thoughts regarding anybody that I could remember, or at least would wish publicly to remember. But one thing did spring to mind, and that was when you mentioned Invidious.
Sorry, were you when you say you were exiled? Just to jump back a second, are you talking about that time you spent in Elba?
Yes, very much so. Yes, yeah. It was my body double that they sent to Saint Helena. But when it comes to Invidious, that just struck me as we missed an opportunity there, didn't we?
Go on.
In our previous Twitter exchange, we both missed Invidious.
We did both miss Invidious. So for people who are unaware, who are off the cancer network that is Twitter, I put out basically a harmless tweet saying, oh, you know, for unknown reasons, I'm just in love with the word ubiquitous today. And we had basically a short response session. Shall we call it response session?
Something along those lines. Yes, I believe I responded saying that's iniquitous.
Yes, that's iniquitous, to which I responded, how blasphemous, preposterous, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, presumptuous, all these words coming out because, let's face it, vocabulary is a gift and a boon to everyone who
Yes, and we
spends
both
time with
missed
it.
Invidious.
And we both missed Invidious. Very sad. Ed B. Visuals says, this is the best thing to watch on a Monday night. Shame I'm working. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, Ed B. Visuals, but hopefully you can catch some of us in audio only, or at least listen to us on the way to work tomorrow, so that should be good. I can see lots of the regulars in the chat before, so Bill Whittaker, nice to see you. Colin P. Smith, nice to see you. John Waters, and the rest, Laconic, that sort of thing. But
I'm half expecting Not So Obvious to go, nice to see you nice.
Nice to see you nice. Yeah, to me, to you, all that sort of things. Say scone, please. I don't know what you want us to say. Does anyone here say scone? I just want to get that out of the way straight away.
Well, I think I was asked this once before. This might actually have gone back all the way to our original tea stream, I'm not sure, in which I kind of admitted to saying both scone and scone, depending on what fitted the rhythm of what I was saying best.
Oh, the perfect nuance of the British are always sitting on the fence in terms of his pronunciation of scone and scone. I've always gone by the rule that it's a scone until it's scone. So that's
all the things I've heard you say that may actually be the most appalling Britisher.
Well, what can I say?
It wouldn't be a binary stream if you didn't attack the Britisher offhand for no good reason at least once. So there is that. I say scone to rhyme with gone. Oh, fair enough. Colin P. Smith, check earlier chat. I'm a scone. Oh, lots of scones. Let me see. Earlier chat. Can't see too much in the earlier chats. Just people saying either no buzzing. I can't hear anything you say at all. Bees at the moment. Okay, so seems to be inconsistent across everyone. That's not great. So we'll see what can be done. I will re-listen to the stream later and then make some adjustments as and when I can. But unfortunately, there's not much I can do in the moment here without blinding you with double repeats of what I'm hearing in my own ear. Right. People in the chat now correcting us, saying scone was originally a Scottish word, scone. Scone is the Anglicization of the word. Well, seeing as I am an Anglo, I am British, I am English, it's got to be scone for cone for me. Right, but into the news of the week. We were talking briefly before the stream started about stuff surrounding Prince Andrew. Have you seen much about this binary?
The whole did he or did he not screw with a 14, 15, 16-year-old, whatever?
Yeah, and the whole does he or doesn't he sweat meme that came out of that as well.
To be fair, there are diseases that stop you sweating for some time when you have. So that's not unbelievable. What is totally unbelievable is his body language in the interview.
Oh, of course, the body language expert that you are coming up and examining that. But also there was the fact that I can't remember which newspaper it was, which basically went out of its way to go and find a load of pictures of him sweating in a club. Anyway, so it's just disproving.
Well, I mean,
him
I've
anyway.
seen some of those pictures. I can't say I noticed him immediately sweating. I would pretty much have to revisit those pictures. What I thought it did basically contradict was, I think somewhere in the interview he said that he wasn't really the kind of person to grab a woman around the midriff or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, there's numerous pictures of him doing exactly that. Yes.
In those pictures, then yes, he was in various forms of embrace with a number of ladies. So that kind of contradicted that statement outright, if you know what I mean.
Oh, just a
It was just a ridiculous statement. I mean, he was a known ladies' man for a long time.
The Squire of Gothos saying that he had MI6 kill Epstein as well in the chat. Which, who knows? Well, I doubt that we'd get the British to do the dirty work. I mean, there are plenty of other filthy colonial places which will do that for us without us having to get involved. Although why I'm endorsing the murder of Epstein, I don't know. Even though the man deserved to die, not without giving up his friends. No. Aside from Prince Andrew, I've been seeing a lot of Jo Swinson making noises about how she should be Prime Minister, including.
Did you
Sorry.
see the news today? I think you might
Oh
have
yes,
retweeted
yes,
my-
yes. I did see your thing. People saying, now I have a 2-minute delay. Is this anti-German discrimination on your part or mere incompetence? Well, it shouldn't be a 2-minute delay. Hopefully it should be fine. It's just my internet, man. There's not much I can do about it. So Jo Swinson basically put in she appealed to the High Court because she was not told that she was not allowed to go on the leaders' debate between Labour and the Conservatives on ITV, and she said, well, this is clearly subverting democracy. And the judge came back at her and said, well, you're not really a candidate to become Prime Minister, are you?
Which is basically like you can't play at the big table. Sorry,
you've only got 14% approval at this point. Get out of here. That's what UKIP had in 2010 or whatever it was, 2016 even. So she's not allowed to play at the table. But also
all around contemptible.
Also, the main reason she gave that she should be allowed on there was that she was the only female candidate, and that immediately qualified her for a seat at the table, because my vagina, basically.
I think we all know that tits are better than qualifications.
Mm-hmm. Oh, nothing says qualification in.
Maybe she should have claimed herself to be a transgender man.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps that would have given her more dibs.
Speaking of the transgender issue, have either of you seen the latest South Park episode?
I can't say I have.
Oh,
No.
the one with Macho Man Randy Savage.
With
yes,
Randy Savage. For those of you who haven't seen it, basically, one of the characters, Strong Woman, that is literally her name in the show, Strong Woman, is going to compete in an athletics tournament, and her ex, Macho Man Randy Savage, who has a different name in there, basically comes in as Heather and wins consistently every single women's sport over the course of the episode that he can get his hands on, and eventually ends up being beaten by girls at board games in classic South Park fashion. So, but it's obviously being shafted. Let me see if I pull up an article actually. So it's being slammed for transphobic joke. Viewers are livid, except of course that none of the viewers are livid. The viewers are amused, and anyone else who's hearing about it on the periphery who would never in their right mind watch South Park unless it's dumping on Donald Trump cares about it. So basically, a strong woman ahead of her in around. Sorry, excuse me. It's the Metro, right? I'm reading the Metro, and they can't do English. She reveals she's honoured to be going up against the first trans woman to enter the Strong Woman contest. And Macho Man Randy Savage comes up and goes, I can't tell you how free I feel. Now that I can compete as a female, I'm ready to smash the other girls. I'm here to kick some fucking ass. Oh dear.
the bit on the podium at the end is best.
Yeah, because she's standing on... Let me see if I can find a picture. Standing on a podium, strong woman on her right. Let me see. Strong.
Like bleeding, battered,
yeah,
bruised.
bleeding. Yeah, here we are. Let me click on this. Don't. Yeah. Come on. I will just mute this. No thanks. Right, now I can share this via Streamlabs. Window capture, that one. So for those of you who can't see, which is primarily my guests, you can see here this massively built WWE-esque figure standing next to Strong Woman, who's here on the number 2 podium, and this beaten, battered, bloody third place character here. Very amusing, to say the least. But yeah, suffice it to say that it's been causing issues for activists, but not really viewers of the show. Do you know what I mean? So how about you guys? Any interesting news to have popped out of the ether for you guys this year? This week, even, not this year.
Nothing I can sort of offhand think of right away.
For me, the one I particularly enjoyed was the. Did you see the update on the Electoral Commission where they basically went, yeah, the Remain campaign broke pretty much all the same rules?
Oh no, I haven't seen this, but again, it doesn't surprise me. So they broke the spending rules, was it? And who they got their money from? Was that right? You'll have to speak up a little bit, Binary. I think you've got a bit of gating going on your microphone. If indeed we can hear. And anybody hear either myself, Binary, or the Britisher? That is the question.
Well, I can hear you.
Well,
if that's one thing.
Well, so it's just you and me apparently at this moment. Binary has left the building.
We seem to have lost Binary. I can still see him in the streaming, but
Yeah.
I can't hear anything.
Unfortunately not. Well, if he comes back, he comes back. If not, what else can you do? What was I going to say? I was going to talk about something. Yeah. So, for those of you who haven't seen it, in fact, Britisher, have you seen Sarah's latest video?
I think I might have. Just refresh my memory. It's about birth rates, isn't it?
It is about birth rates, and it's got some really interesting ONS, so the Office of National Statistics data, about basically whether or not women in the UK want to have children. And I was really hoping that she would be here to talk about this, because it reveals something kind of that kind of goes against what people have been saying over time. Certainly while I've been alive, which is that people just don't want to have kids. People, especially women have grown beyond the desire for biological reproduction. They basically just want to screw around and have careers, and are not really that interested. But according to the ONS data, just 8% of women don't want a child at some point, based on that particular survey. And I actually found this quite moving, personally, myself.
Yes, I saw your tweet. I think it was through your tweet that I actually got to see the video.
Yeah, it was
so
basically it goes against that data in and of itself, goes against everything that I have been told, as it were. Because I was getting a bit, shall we call it, over and done with politics. I felt like I was fighting for, like, people will have noticed that my video rate has slowed down. I changed my content up a little bit to start producing more comedy stuff as well. I will still be doing that, but the main thing that I had, I got this kind of fatigue with it, because I'm surrounded all the time by people who are not of the same political persuasion as myself, who have no care for the future population of Britain, don't really care for British culture, maybe ashamed of British culture. I don't know anyone who is really proud to be who they are, outside of the YouTube community, and I see those people sporadically. But in my everyday life, it's just one of those things. And you're told, basically, by the people at, for instance, the university where I am, you get told that no, you don't really want it. And most of the women in university as well will tell you that they don't want children. The last two people I dated told me they didn't want children, and it was one of those things where I was like, it's a real struggle. I feel like I'm struggling on behalf of what is essentially a dead ideology, or a dead basically like what is left. Who else holds my point of view? And I didn't really see it outside of the internet bubble. But this kind of data just shows you that a lot of people, even if they're apathetic, still hold true to at least some of the values that I would consider to be biologically instantiated. Do you know what I mean?
I'm afraid I'm a bit lost as to what biologically instantiated
Oh,
means.
biology, like the need to reproduce, the desire to reproduce, wanting to have children because it's a joyful responsibility, that sort of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. I mean, put it like this: when it comes to that video, I think I was as surprised as more than likely you are at what she said the study found.
Hmm.
Um, Namely that pretty much, over 90% of women declare a desire to have children.
Yeah,
And a considerable number of women, wasn't it always in groups of 14%?
yeah,
14% one child, 14% two children, 14% three children, and then it
pretty
went
much.
on into
Most
very high numbers, if I remember rightly.
most of them
Um,
wanted 1 to 2 children, and then there was 14% for three or more, and then
hmm,
14% for four or more. I think that
okay,
was what it
okay.
was. Yeah.
Um, what struck me was that this is one study.
Yeah.
I would always caution to basically, one study is the equivalent of one political poll.
I'm well
You know,
aware. Is
so
what I'm more
so
concerned when I look at.
we all know that when it comes to
This is
trying
my
to assess where politics really lies, which party has support and whatever, you need a considerable number of polls, and therefore to basically take it as a certainty, given that you've now had one study and you have no idea regarding the motivations of the person who has done that study, that's always a bit of a danger.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, it is it is refreshing to hear something coming from a completely different angle for once.
I'm just
What I
trying to.
would,
I'm just
yeah, go
trying to
ahead.
find the sample size, because that's something
Mhm.
which is always there. Because if it's
Yeah.
if it's a sample of like 100 people, it's it's obviously going to be less
Oh,
valid.
yes. I mean, there is another version of academic fraud that I once made a brief video on once, which is the meta-analysis, which is the way in which you can up your sample size by combining lots and lots and lots of
Well,
studies.
more likely what ends up happening, because there's nothing there's
I'm
nothing.
back away.
Oh, welcome back, Binary. There's nothing
He's been
inherently wrong. There's nothing inherently wrong with the concept of the meta-analysis, but it is utilized by both scientific and political pundits, let's call them, to basically draw conclusions that a meta-analysis is incapable of drawing. So a meta-analysis exists in order to bundle together research. It should be rejected if there's not enough talking about the contrasts within it for a start, although pay-to-publish journals being what they are, anything's possible. But also people forget that a meta-analysis, because it is a coalescence of various different methodologies over time, and that you're usually utilizing mean scores. It is not the same as a scientific study, and so
No, it's not. But
and
it is a.
it's
If you have
unable
a
to
wide enough
it's
meta,
yeah,
it
yeah.
is still of use.
It's unable to draw causal links. It can identify correlations, potential correlations, and inform future research. But that's all it's supposed to do, is inform future research. It is not supposed to give you anything approaching this proves X, right?
So it isn't, for example, supposed to be the scientific basis for the passing of a law.
No. No
I
meta-analysis should
know
do
of
that.
such an example.
Do go on.
Oh no! When it came to the law on extreme pornography, they did actually commission, what did they call it? A rapid evidence assessment, because they had actually proposed the law, and then it was pointed out to them, you have absolutely no evidence.
Hmm.
So then, after the proposal of the law, then they commissioned the evidence assessment, which,
Yeah.
given that by that time they then they commissioned a scientist who had already expressed a support for the law. I mean, that's another giveaway. And that person then conducted a meta-analysis
Yeah.
whereby she found every reason possible to exclude any sort of study that didn't actually come to the conclusion she wanted,
Yeah.
thereby simply increasing the sample size of all the studies whose conclusions she agreed with,
Yeah.
and then stating that it was basically, unopposable fact, scientific fact, that this was so, and Parliament took this as the scientific basis for the passing of the law.
Yeah. Horrendous. Again, never trust, the scientifically
So,
illiterate.
This is why Dominic Cummings has been proven right yet again. This is what happens when you have a body of people with no verifiable expertise outside of being politicians.
Yeah. I still reckon, like, the biggest thing that has come across my mind recently with regards to our politicians is we need to unsalary them. And if we can't unsalary them, then we should make their salary equal to the national average earnings.
What do you mean unsalary? Because I've done a lot of research into job performance and behavioral economics, and let's just say you want to be careful about what you incent.
So the idea is that you remove the salary for MPs. It should not be a paid position.
I would be skeptical of that.
Okay, so what incentive do you create by doing that?
The hope is that the people who end up gravitating towards the position are people who want to put people first rather than trying to hold on to their job for as long as possible.
I would argue that instead what you're creating is a rather privileged job that only certain people will be able to fulfill who will be able to afford it.
Which is why I have the alternate my alternate proposal being make the salary the national average.
I personally lean in the opposite direction. My opinion is treble MP salaries, all of them.
What?
Bear with me.
Okay.
Bear with me. Treble MP salaries, all of them. Ban all outside expenses of any kind. Set up student dorm type living for MPs in Westminster. Obviously a little bit nicer, but that kind of halls of residence with meals provided cheaply and everything like that type of fare. So they've got no excuse for my second house, etc., etc.
Yeah.
No, tough. You have your primary residence in your constituency, and you have your Westminster provided accommodation. Ban all outside lobbying for 5 years after they leave office. Give them their salary for 5 years after they leave office. Any additional money claimed of any kind, any donations taken, any outside interests, any campaigns, anything in that, automatic 20-year prison term. No time off for good behaviour. None.
I mean, I can see where you're going here. When it comes to the dorm-style residence, much as I quite sympathise with the idea of basically keeping them in barracks, I would effectively go for, as right now they're effectively buying a selection of property across London.
Very nice property at that.
Yeah, by all means buy property across London, but it then belongs to the state and not to them.
Yeah, so whoever inherits your position.
Yeah, precisely. The reason I would do that is because I could foresee the danger regarding terrorism of creating a honeypot of locations of MPs, which would kind of become the prime target of attack.
Also, why treble the salary? This is the thing I'm
because there is no good reason to say then that I need extra income for, I don't know, for my living expenses or my travel, or I've got 4 children, I can't survive on this, I need a bit of extra income, or and that's why you give them the money after they leave the office as well. There's no excuse then to say, well, I have to be able to earn a living when I leave office. No,
but
you've got 5 years of guaranteed salary.
But I mean, 240,000 a year.
Yes, and at that point, you start attaching things to it like it is our expectation that you remain in, say, sake of argument, if you take a cabinet post, you're required to remain in that cabinet post for a minimum amount of time and sit certain qualifications that then enable you to stay in it beyond that. So again, I draw you back to the Finnish model where the Finnish economics minister, Finnish economy minister is an economist. The health minister is an ex-senior doctor. They have people in those posts who have genuine expertise in that area. They might not have expertise in running it, but they have expertise at least in the field.
Okay.
And I think that's part of the problem. We have a professional class who have, well, running the country in theory, but have expertise in absolutely nothing, so end up dependent on the civil service, who obviously have their own vested interests in how things are done.
I can see Painted Blue in the chat saying all politicians must have held an independent or non-civil service job for 5 years or more before being allowed to hold office anyway. As an extra caveat. What do we make of that?
Is that the case now? I don't think it is it?
No, that's a proposal.
Did
Yeah,
that ever
I would go
apply
as
to
far as saying
Winston
it must hold a
Churchill?
professional accreditation of some kind.
Would you require anything of the kind for a position of prime minister though?
Maybe not for prime minister. I could see that being the arguable exception because your job is to set overall tone and policy, then the minutiae of each department.
But sure,
One of
you
the
try to say.
problems, one of the problems I foresee with something like that is that. Do you remember there is that scene in Yes Minister or Yes, I think it might be Yes Prime Minister. I'm not sure, where Sir Humphrey does his speech about how there isn't actually any choice regarding who you have in government, because give or take, one party will hold about half of Parliament, so 300 odd people, of which, half are too silly and mischievous and whatever, and can't therefore be considered anyway. And he kind of whittles it down, and he says, essentially, in the end, you end up with about 100 people, and you have roughly 100 positions. And therefore, all you can do is shuffle them around a bit, but as such, you don't really have much choice.
Well, that's the
Um,
point. Half of these posts aren't fucking needed.
but once you start putting ever greater demands on who can do what, in a way you are whittling down the choice further and further, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, but take the cabinet. Why is the cabinet, what is it, 20 something posts now? Why is it not 5 or 6 key posts with a couple of specialist advisors who are non appointed?
I mean,
Well,
You elect the minister to take the decision, but
yes,
you
and
have
I
certain
think we,
experts that are
I
not
think
beholden.
we, I think we know why that's the case. Um,
Well,
and
yeah,
it's
jobs
it's
for the
it's got
boys.
nothing to do. Yes, it's jobs for the boys, and it is brownie points that the prime minister can hand out, so he can effectively reward his loyal allies.
it's 22 positions.
Yeah, which is insane. I mean, uh, so I've sat on like management steering groups for things, and there's no management steering group I've sat on, even in the MOD, which is probably one of the most bureaucratic institutions I've ever worked for.
Yep.
There's been more than about 10.
Like the ideal range is between 3 and 6, and even then, like when it comes to
Because you get nothing done beyond about 5 people.
so
It's impossible to get any agreement.
one of my friends worked for TFL, I think it was, and he was basically trying to restructure the way everything worked there as a contractor, and they had a huge issue in that they had too many people on the team, so they managed to get the team down to 3 people, and then a new guy came in and was like, I don't trust anything you've done, I'm starting everything over again. So even at that small number of people with very specific responsibilities, it became a bit of a cluster, if that's comparable in any way. What do we have? We have the Prime Minister, Chancellor of the Exchequer, Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs, Secretary of State for Home, Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, Lord Chancellor and Secretary of the State for Justice, Secretary of State for Brexit, Secretary of State for Defence, Health and Social Care, Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, Minister for Women and Equalities, International Trade and Border Trade, Work and Pensions, Education, Food, Environment and Rural Affairs, Housing, Communities and Local Government, Transport, Northern Ireland, Scotland, the House of Lords, Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, International Development,
Now,
and
let's do a quick exercise. Go through whatever you think the most important 10 of those posts are. Look at the current incumbent in those posts. Tell me any expertise they have that is relevant. Any at all. I'll take anything.
Just looking at,
I mean,
I'm just looking at Andrea
here's the
Levson.
reality.
Andrea
Just while you're looking
Levson's
it up, here's the
smiling
reality
face.
from a performance point of view. Because again, I look at this all the time with work. Some of the most competent, highly adaptable, highly intelligent people I've ever met can get up to speed on a job in about 3 months if they've done something comparable before, 6 to 12 if they haven't. Then look at the average tenure of a minister.
Right.
And then you're going to go, no wonder these people never get anything fucking done because they're not in the job long enough to learn, even if they knew something to start with, which they don't in most.
Yeah. Except,
Is Hunt a doctor?
Hmm?
let me see.
Is Hunt a doctor?
He wasn't. I'm not sure. Let me have a look.
I don't know. I keep hearing he might have been, but
Let me have a
considering how
look.
much he's hated by the NHS, that would be quite amusing.
He worked for 2 years as a management consultant, became an
Yeah.
English language teacher in Japan,
So not really then.
had 3 failed startups, including an attempt to export marmalade to Japan, and he then sold a PR company and created a guide to help people who want to study rather than just travel abroad in the 90s.
So I think that's a great big no, isn't it?
That's
Yes.
a great
It's
pick.
funny.
No,
So the man in
It's
charge of the
funny that
health
I've
service has
kind
never
of
worked a
heard
day in
that.
the health service.
It's funny that I've heard that, and Binary also seemed to intone that he's heard that.
I
So
think
I
it was put
wonder,
around as PR
so I
Britisher.
wonder why that's been circulating. But there you go.
and then we have
So
Matt Hancock, who's the current health secretary, and he has worked in the civil service his entire life by the things. Although he was he worked for his family business as an economist at the Bank of England and as chief of staff for Chancellor of the Exchequer. So there's that, and he has 2
Yes,
degrees.
Chancellor of the Exchequer George Osborne,
Yeah.
which means you can trust him about as far as you can fucking throw him.
So yeah, he has 2 degrees, Oxford and Cambridge, but that's about it really.
Honestly, I played this exercise under camera and I haven't played it since. But I defy you to find anyone with genuine expertise in what they're doing.
Yeah, it's very difficult. It was one of the biggest problems.
wasn't one of the most colourful personalities? Wasn't that Grant Shapps?
Grant Shapps? I'm not familiar.
Yeah, am I misremembering things? You know, he wasn't he sort of leader of the Tories, and I think he was also Secretary of State for something, or he might even be now.
He used to be the Secretary of
Was
State.
Conservative Party chair for a while.
Yes,
He's currently the Secretary of State Transport.
yes, and didn't he once lead an election campaign for Cameron or something like that? But if I recall, in his past, didn't he sort of have some kind of history of sort of self help books, as in, you know, get rich quick something?
Um,
Um,
he
so I think he's perhaps one of the most colourful personalities in
Oh
regard
yeah,
to what
he wrote it under a
expertise he brings.
pseudonym, didn't he?
Yes, I think so. Yes.
trying to think. I'm trying to find it here.
It was under the name Michael Green, costing £497. Promised consumers a toolkit that would earn them £20,000 in 20 days.
Well, there you go.
Oh,
Yeah,
that was
yeah.
right. He used the names Michael Green and Sebastian Fox. He denied having used his pseudonyms after entering Parliament, and threatened legal action against the constituent who stated on Facebook that he had.
Yeah. See, when we hear something like that, to a certain extent, everyone likes a rogue. So to a certain extent, there is a certain amount of charm to it until the moment when you suddenly reveal him to be litigious, and
Yeah.
that's when it kind of loses its shine, doesn't it?
In mod,
Yeah, so the whole I tried to take the piss and I got caught thing, fair enough. I tried to take the piss, I got caught, and then I tried to sue someone in response.
and it's saying, oh, the constituent he'd threatened with legal action, then threatened him back with legal action. He also was caught either like he got caught editing his own Wikipedia page, which he's not
Got one of
supposed
his
to
staff
do,
did more exactly, I think.
or one of his staff did. And he denied that allegation.
Was that basically an edit to his Wikipedia page that kind of claimed that he was, I don't know, the descendant of the sort of god emperor of the galaxy or something like
It
that?
says here Grant Shapps has the largest penis in the world. How did that happen?
Oh, well, it's clearly from his dealings with a cryptocurrency company called OpenBricks, where he collected coins, cryptocurrency tokens from it with a future value of up to £700,000, and then resigned from that company. So
Yeah,
it's
not at all
bizarre.
fucking suspicious.
Yeah.
You see, as such, when it comes to these things, I'm perhaps a little more forgiving. As far as I'm concerned, if people have interesting backgrounds and whatever, uh, what matters to me is whether they're competent, um, and that needn't necessarily mean that they have a qualification.
Yes, you're right. Qualifications do not necessarily indicate competence. What qualifications should do, in an ideal scenario, is give you a minimum bar of knowledge that they have achieved to attain that.
I can see it for certain positions, right? So definitely something like health secretary. You want someone who actually understands the fucking NHS. If you have someone who's going to be defense, you want someone who knows not just the MOD but the military. And that sort of thing. Preferably, you'd want someone who may have worked previously in intelligence when it comes to, the Foreign Office and that sort of thing. I can see.
Don't make me start making jokes about military intelligence.
No, let's not make jokes about military intelligence. So yeah, I can see it for some positions, but not so much for others. So, for instance, I don't really think that if you're the Minister for Transport, for instance, that you need to have a qualification in.
No, but call me radical. Maybe, I don't know, someone who's an ex-lorry driver, an ex-taxi driver, someone who has is a member of SILT, the Chartered Institute for Logistics and Transport, something like that, where you can say you have at least some of the knowledge in this field.
The difficulty that you have with these sorts of things, as if academic agent were here, he might mention, is that you don't want to put too much power in the hands of effectively an accreditation agency, where basically if they don't like you, you never get into them, therefore you can never make an impact, and then you end up with only a specific set of people with a specific set of political ideals.
I get that. My issue is not that. Hell, I don't even want there to be a massively high bar. Right now, I'll settle for there being any bar other than the ability to maintain a pulse and say the party.
It's fair.
I mean, one of the dangers, of course, if you bring people in from various industries, is that you effectively bring in their lobby.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, but then you can counter that with some of the anti-lobbying measures I was talking about. It's not perfect, but it's pretty. How many people would risk a 20-year prison sentence for minor infractions? I don't think.
Well, yes, but I mean that would merely sorry, that would merely deal with the financial side of things. What I mean is, if they are part of, sorry, I'm completely. Yeah,
you're talking about regulatory capture, aren't you? Yeah.
Yes, it's more a question of, if they have already been preconditioned by the fact that they have been working a particular job and therefore have sort of been preconditioned to see the institutional angle from that side, and that they are effectively already captured by that industry. And then you start placing them into ministerial positions.
Yeah, I see that danger. I just think at the moment we seem to have gone to the polar opposite to that danger, where we decided we're not going to have any expertise effectively in a politician.
I think our main problem is not really with the ministers. Our main problem, I think, is with the MPs. We are bringing in such a low bar of MPs that the pool from which to choose ministers is therefore a very shallow one.
Shall we call it dilute?
So that's a fair point, because you can only draw from the available pool of 600 and whatever.
So I think that is one of the chief problems. So we need a higher quality intake of MPs, and I think once you bring that in, you will then immediately start raising the standard of ministerial positions.
Because, don't you?
Sorry?
So the MPs are drawn from the public, therefore it's an issue with the public at large.
Yes, but how many Jess Phillips and Diane Abbotts can the nation actually afford, if you know what I mean?
Probably quite a lot, I would guess.
Well, yes, but what I mean is within Parliament, as in do we believe that the tendency is to increase the number of MPs of said quality or to decrease them?
Well, we would hope decrease, but the next general election will tell a lot, won't it?
Yeah, yeah. But particularly on the Labour benches, I think there has been a very sort of strong tendency to basically, particularly with these women-only shortlists, to
They're a
bring in
disaster.
absolute pap.
Yeah.
And, you know, in the end, the whole system stands and falls by what 650 people one can actually draw into the chamber. Because not only does this mean that you diminish the quality of the Labour Party, it also means that the pressure is effectively taken off the quality needed on the opposition to the Labour Party in
Yeah,
order to
you
defeat them in any
Yes. What caliber
constituency.
do you need to oppose Diane Abbott? Yes.
So, I mean, Diane Abbott, I'm assuming, is in a safe seat. But if you have a contested seat in which your opponent is someone like Diane Abbott, you know, what caliber do you need to be in order by the public to be seen as the only possible choice? And that's where I think that we really have seen a diminution of quality throughout the whole House of Commons.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I mean, all anything shortlists, whatever characteristic you happen to want to insert in there, have been disaster in every industry they've been tried in. I mean, look no further than the Black Law Society in the UK. They were all essentially all in favour of it, and then they found out it means that essentially anyone hiring a lawyer who happens to be black now starts to question whether or not they got that job by virtue of capability or skin
Yeah,
colour.
yeah.
And all of a sudden they're complaining
I mean,
about how unfair these shortlists are.
I would point back to the big beasts of the past. Now, I know people like Michael Heseltine and Ken Clark and whatever are not really flavor of the month anymore due to time has just simply overtaken them. Put it like that. But generally, I would say, that generation of politician, particularly on the conservative side, and I'm not speaking from partisanship here, I would say was actually seen as fairly competent, even though that they weren't trained in this or that sphere in which they engaged as ministers.
They
But
understood how to play politics, yes, definitely.
they kind of understood what they were about, and people weren't kind of describing them as sort of complete fools who were kind of tapping around in the dark, if you know what I mean. Um, and in a way, I think I honestly don't think I'm looking at this through rose-tinted spectacle.
No,
I
I
think
think
we
you're right. There was
did
definitely a
have a
different
higher
caliber.
standard, and I think the only way we can get back to that, and I mean, it sounds atrocious to sort of say this was a higher caliber, given that these are the major years we're looking at, which were a complete disaster. But if you want to get back to that, I think what you need to do is you need to raise the standard of the House of Commons. Um, and I think one major part of that is the Labour shortlists have to go, because like
I
that
think all shortlists have to go.
you get better competition.
There was a case that went through the courts about 7 years ago now, 2012, that basically tried to argue that all anything shortlists were by their very nature discriminatory.
yeah.
I don't know what happened with it, but it just seemed to fade from public view, and I never heard what the verdict was. But there was a serious attempt to argue that it was deeply discriminatory, because it technically is. It's just termed positive discrimination.
Yeah, the Equality Act 2010 makes it legal, but it's
No. That's actually wrong. The Equality Act doesn't enable positive discrimination to be legal. It makes positive action. Positive discrimination is still illegal,
yeah,
yet it is routinely practiced by the major political parties. Positive action is where you have two equally qualified people who can demonstrate they're both equally capable, and you decide, based on the makeup of your organization, to give it to the one from the minority background. That's perfectly legal.
yeah. I know that's legal, but that is a shell for positive discrimination when a lot of companies.
Precisely, but nobody seems to want to take that argument on anymore. That's what frustrates me. They seem to just let it hand wave, which is why you get a party full of bluntly female MPs that can't cut it. In the case of,
That's, I wish I had an answer. Um,
I think it'll only turn around when people start actively taking them to court for it. Is my
yeah, which is what we saw with the police earlier this year, because they changed their standard to, oh, we're going to score you, and then if you score above a 40 on our test, it's going to count as you've passed, and then everybody gets given a blanket pass to avoid discrimination. So you're all technically at the same ability level, so we can then select whoever we want based on ethnic backgrounds. And he did actually manage to sue and say that he'd been turned down because he hadn't said he was gay, basically on the sheet.
they've been doing that for a long time with men and women. Though they've long since had two fitness standards, despite the fact. I mean, you can argue there's room for a difference in fitness standard on the non-specialist, but even for the specialist posts where there was good reason, say like firearms officers, where you need a certain grip strength to control the recoil of the weapon comfortably.
The question has always been, when it comes to the military, are you testing us for the requirements of the job, or are you testing us on a basis of sex? And it should be on the basis of job. I don't care if it's a different fitness test standard for every single job. Like, that's what the the PTs are. That's what they're there for. Apart from anything else, to help you train, but also to administer that test. And if they have to basically just they're putting the same scores in the same boxes. It's just like they get a different sheet of paper based on your trade. But just blanket scores for men and women, especially when I know guys who they shouldn't have, but they basically just barely scraped a fail on their fitness test, and they're told you're a disgrace, get out of the military, basically. Especially if they're just coming out of training and they should be at the fittest that they're going to be. And then on the other hand, you've got the women who are who basically they pass, but they're passing to a lower value than that guy failed on, and they're told, oh, congratulations, welcome to the fold. It makes no sense. I don't see it.
My personal favourite was hearing so one of the senior AFOs that I used to be in touch with dealt with all the training basically for the new firearms recruits for the police. They had a 480% increase in negligent discharges. Guess what that was due to?
Go on.
Not being able to control the weapon. Guess why?
They didn't have the grip strength.
Correct.
Yeah. This is one of the big things that you're seeing in the military at the moment. You're like a lot of leniency for the sake of discrimination. At least that's what I saw.
Well, I don't think you're only seeing that in the military, aren't you?
No, but that's just my experience.
You're seeing that in the fire brigade. It's somewhat farcical what is happening.
It's one of those difficult things because it's so instantiated now. It's really difficult to know how to break it. And we do not have a political figure in the UK at the moment who can cut through the bullshit, for lack of a better term.
It would take a Salvini-esque character, wouldn't it?
Or just someone who the public will get behind, because as much as you might have someone who, on say the issue of Brexit, right, you had like the Farage, but he's still like a deeply divisive character. He had support, but he doesn't have that much support. Like, we don't have that kind of people getting behind, I don't know, like Dominic Tarzinski in Poland, and just basically saying, yeah, we're not going to allow Muslims into our country because until they basically put a church up in their country, they will never have a mosque here. We're a Catholic country, and we always will be, and that's not, we're not going to change our identity for these people. It's just the British sentiment, but is not there. Like, we're basically castrated people when it comes to dealing with these kinds of issues. We have no sense of our own identity.
I think you underestimate things there, to be honest. I think there's a danger of sort of complete defeatism setting in these kind of things, and as far as I'm concerned, it's more a matter of the turning around of a supertanker. It takes time. it doesn't just turn on a penny.
Yeah, but
And I think signs of resistance to this are becoming ever more apparent. And signs of effectively the entire intellectual breakdown of the argument of the sort of the identitarian left seem to be, they seem to be fairly obvious. I mean, I just watched a video this afternoon. I don't know if you are aware of that channel, Trigonometry.
go on.
Yes, they're good guys.
I've not watched any of their
they
stuff, but
they
yeah.
had this feminist on. Is it Posey Parker or something like that? She's called, and she was the one who basically really clashed with some woman who ran a transgender charity or whatever and gets money from the lottery fund and things like that.
Was this Monroe Bergdorf?
No, no, no. It's a woman, I think, whose son herself kind of became transgender daughter or whatever, and she kind of spoke out against that, saying, basically for his 16th birthday, this boy was castrated and things like that. And as one can tell, she doesn't mince her words. And therefore she's been banned from Twitter. I think she's been banned from one or two other social media platforms. And she was kind of talking about it, and she was coming at it obviously from she's a fairly militant feminist. But you could see that kind of the intellectual fabric is just breaking down. That the feminists and the transgender folk are at each other's throats, and this won't last forever. These trends never tend to last forever, and at the same time, one can sense the resentment growing in society, not just from the sort of the right of center echo chambers online, but in real life, when you come across people who might be ardent leftists who basically tell you, I can't listen to this crap anymore. And
you're right. There is a backswing coming. Here's the problem I see with it, Britisher. Any situation, more or less, is a generation away from normality. If this stuff persists long enough, some element of it, perhaps the less extreme element, makes its way into the permanent lexicon.
I understand what you mean, that it is always a kind of dream to kind of reset things, to take things backwards. And that's more often than not, that's impossible. I think in this case, some of the things will have to go backwards. When it comes to the trans thing, it will have to go backwards. It just doesn't fit. It's a complete contradiction of everything. So I see that eventually crumbling and being reverted. In some other things, I mean, particularly when it comes to the immigrant population and whatever, again, that's very, very difficult to reverse, because that's, once people live here, they live here. What people would point to then is differences in birth rates and whatever. But again, with policies and with attitudinal shifts, birth rates in the native population can also shift. At the same time, just as we're in a way seeing with the Brexit thing, Britain can become a more, or it can become a less attractive destination for immigrants, and it can become a more, or it can become a less attractive place for existing immigrants to stay. So I don't see this so much as sort of completely set in stone, as some people who the folks who describe themselves as black-pilled will see it, whereby we're just doomed. I think that what we're seeing in Eastern Europe is effectively a reaction to what they have seen happen in the West.
Well, and you've got to remember they've got that whole not going to take this shit lying down attitude after being under the Iron Curtain 40 years or whatever it was.
Well, I mean, we still wait for that attitude to show itself regarding the European Union. But when
I just don't think it's quite reached the critical mass yet where it's reflected in votes.
But what I'm trying to say is that what we are seeing in Eastern Europe is reactive. It's not something that has just sort of come about by their own initiative. It's reactive to something they have observed. And I think something similar will happen in the West. It's just taking much more time to happen, given the fact that, yes, one has so hard driven in that one direction. It's harder to turn the oil tanker around.
As Colin P. Smith says in the chat, you're basically saying always remember pendulums swing both ways.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and that's honestly, people considering me to be some sort of far right. As I've explained before, I'm not actually much more 2 notches on the compass to the right. But that's my quiet fear and why I push back on this stuff more than anything. I have a concern if the pendulum is allowed to go unchecked in one direction for too long, the backswing is going to be pretty spectacular and even uglier in some ways.
Yes.
I am equally worried about the backswing. I think that what we might see in the backswing and a whole raft of social matters
Mm-hmm.
could be negative. But
I
at the
mean,
same
take the
time,
the race question just for
there is
the
the
prime
race
one.
question. Uh, it's a question across the board in many things, I think. But the backswing will come, and because you can sense that the population is getting sick of it, and the population has, not all of them, a large segment of the population have long since realized that they are being manipulated. And by the time you realize you're being manipulated, you very quickly become hostile to it. And I think that is what we are seeing, and it's gathering pace. And generally, I mean, there was just I might have mentioned this example before. There's an elderly gentleman who lives at the end of my street.
Mm-hmm.
He's very very softly spoken, always very dapper, always very properly dressed, suit and tie, the whole thing. When he goes out, the kind of the example par excellence of genteel British civility. And I remember sort of asking him, because I know him to be a kind of, card carrying Tory, if you know what I mean,
Mm-hmm.
what he made of Brexit and this and whatever. And he just looked at me and went, as far as I'm concerned, they should all be strung up. And this was so this was so surprising. You know, this is not the way the man talks.
Mm.
But you could just sense that, oh, okay, this was regarding the Brexit question, but you could sense here was one of the genteel, civil Englishmen just basically reaching the end of his tether and saying something that, for all the years in which I've known him, was kind of unimaginable.
You've clearly radicalised him, Britisher.
Yes, that must
Well,
be
there
it.
is some.
But
There is something. Which was the? We all know the quote, Britisher. Something about the fury of a quiet man.
but yes, I mean it is precisely that in his case, that for all the years I've known him, he's never expressed himself regarding politics in that way. Always very nuanced, you know, and you just sort of sensed he was a man who just basically eventually said, "Okay, look, I've had enough. To hell with the lot of them." And I really, I think there is a sense of that in the nation, and I think Brexit is only one small part of it, and therefore I do think that culturally we are reaching the limit of where this culture war can go, and the pushback is basically materializing as we speak. The question is simply, where is this pendulum going to go? That is the worry, because it could, given how far it has been pushed to the left, it could swing way, way right.
And
Yeah.
that's the thing. They no longer have the moral high ground to argue against that swing, having been endorsing the opposite swing for 2.5 decades. There's no moral grandstanding available there, is there?
And basically having how should we say, having created the vocabulary and the mechanisms by which to do this is one of the things I always warn about. That what I am convinced that what we have seen with the left is they're adopting some of the tactics that were effectively sort of arrived at by the moral right in the 1980s and whatever. And they simply took that outrage culture and they made it their own. And they have obviously since then, they have further developed that. And what is now the worry is if the right now adopts this and pushes it in the other direction and uses it in the same way, one of the problems we have discovered with these techniques and methods that are being used is that society doesn't really have an easy defense mechanism against this. And that's why it can be so easy, so readily exploited.
Here's the tricky thing.
I do
here's
wonder,
the tricky thing. You're talking about this swing in public opinion, but where that swing needs to happen is within the structures of the dominant parties as they are now, unless you're expecting a dominant third party to appear, which we've seen like the murmurings of, but really hasn't materialized, because otherwise what you end up doing is like what happens in the British people is we're kind of stolidly resigned to our own FPTP system, first past the post system. And so unless that change happens, you just end up with soft left and communism in terms of what you can vote for, and the people on the right who will going to consistently vote conservative because anything but the communism, right? Where is that bastion of support going to come from? Because everybody knows that either a spoiled ballot or an independent candidate is effectively a wasted vote at this point.
Well,
you say that. I think it's about to change with this upcoming election. I think you're looking at close to a Labour wipeout. You're probably looking at less than 150 seats, and probably Lib Dems coming up to 50 to 100.
You are more optimistic than I am in terms of the Labour wipeout.
We are definitely seeing a change, a significant change of temperament that is more than likely going to occur on the Tory benches.
Yeah.
And given that this has happened really in a matter of... I mean, let's go back a few months and Phil Hammond was Chancellor and David Gauke, who is now advising people to vote Lib Dem, was Justice Secretary. So in the matter of those few months, it's gone from that to our now believing the outcome of the staff, at least, on the Tory benches to be considerably more Brexiteer. And with them being Brexiteer, they are more than likely also going to be somewhat more right-wing in their general, political compass. Now, if that can happen within a matter of months, what could happen, for example, at the next general election after that? If that trend continues, if it accelerates, because pendulums have that habit of, what we are seeing is the soft turning around of the pendulum at the moment, or the slowing down of the pendulum in its travel leftwards. I still think that we might all be in for somewhat of a surprise when this thing starts moving, and I honestly do think it will move.
Have you seen Margin Call, Britisher, the movie?
It doesn't immediately ring a bell, but I might have seen it.
Jeremy Irons, the guy who played Sylar in Heroes. Anyway, there's this beautiful moment when they're approaching the housing crash, and they're having this midnight meeting where one of them has just found out what's about to happen, or what he thinks is about to happen, and the CEO sort of stands up and says, "Do you know why I earn the big bucks? Do you know why I sit in this chair? My job isn't to do what all these lackeys do. It's to guess what the music will do a day, a week, a month from now." He kind of stands up, goes to the window, looks at it, and turns around and says, "Do you know what I hear now? Not a sound." And there's that sort of beautiful moment of you have that realization that he's been cottoned onto this for a while and is only now choosing to express. I think that's what some people are describing, or you're describing there to some degree. this has been in a number of people's minds for a while, but we're only now starting to see the visible movement of the pendulum, or at least the lack of further leftward travel in some ways.
Yes, and I think it's just simply boiling down to the fact that there is a detachment with reality. And the moment that begins to break down, the moment that the general public look at some of the things that are being thrust at them on everyday television like the BBC, and they simply look at it and go, no, that's when it's fairly obvious that the breach has occurred. And therefore, I really think, yes, we are at the stage where now one can't hear the music playing. That this is the moment where it's clearly happening. But we don't necessarily have to immediately sort of expect drama within the next months or whatever. This has taken years to get where we were. It will more than likely take years in the reversal, if you know what I mean.
Well, there's two competing theories there. You might be right. The other competing theory, if you try and resist an elastic band that's trying to snap back, what are you effectively doing? You're
Well,
continuing to
yes,
stretch on, and then it snaps
eventually
back
you will
more
just
violently.
snap the rubber band. Yes. It depends how willing the it depends how willing the various players in the system are. So I could imagine in certain places the resistance is going to be so furious that it snaps because one will just not be willing to give. I think in other places, there will just simply be a sort of gradual surrender to it, in just the same way as there has been a gradual surrender to the this left wing identitarian shift. I think at some point, yes, there could be the reversal, that there will be just a gradual surrender in the opposite direction. But in some institutions, yes, they will be that indoctrinated, they will dig in, they will refuse in any way to give way. And in those institutions, the rubber band will need to snap.
BBC.
Well,
Well,
it's
gentlemen,
yeah.
before we get to, we've been on this topic for a long time now, and we've been talking about how the pendulum may or may not swing.
We actually moved far away from the birth rate
So
question.
we did move far away from the birth rate question. So I'm not going to bring us back onto topic because I think we went far enough. But I'm going to move us on. I'm going to go through a few super chats and change the topic because I could see all sorts of chat going on I can see all sorts of chat going on in the chat, and some of it's related, but some of it isn't. So I want to keep people engaged. Mergut says, "Coup Stark, nuff said." Now that was at 10 to 9, so I'm not entirely sure what that was in reference to. If you say it in the chat, Mergut, then I'm sure we will, we'll revisit that one. Ratface says, "Here's something for keeping me entertained at work. Capitalism ho." Thank you very much, Ratface. Adam Morgan says, "Have you seen that Claire Lehrman tweet about demographic results being bigotry?" I have. Have you guys seen this one?
No, I don't think I
Demographic
have.
results being bigotry.
If I go to Stream Chat on Discord, I will post the link to her Twitter feed, and you can see the image in there straight away. So basically, if I just go on Streamlabs so everyone else can see this as well.
Yes,
this is
I
a
did see that.
slide at a conference for science teachers in Washington. It says, "Our responsibility with data. If you conclude that outcome differences by demographic subgroup are a result of anything but a broken system, that is by definition bigotry, asterisk, racism, classism, sexism, etc." Which is, frankly, a scary slide to have.
To be honest, that's not too surprising. I've heard UK teacher friends say pretty much the same thing.
It's not surprising. It's still scary. This is from a conference by Washington STEM Impact Director Renee Myers Twitchell, stressing the importance. But basically, yeah, this sort of stuff is rampant, especially within the humanities. But the idea that it could be something due to socioeconomic factors as opposed to a broken system And that's just one factor. Like this, everything apart from like everything in scientific literature pushes you to this idea that if you look at a problem from the point of view that it's a univariate problem, you're a terrible scientist. You are awful. And then you get this sort of awful slides here which say, let's reduce everything in a reductivist way to a single variant, a single variable.
To basically go back to something you mentioned earlier, it would effectively say that the reason those women couldn't perform as well during those military fitness tests,
Yeah,
because they are a demographic subgroup.
yeah.
It would mean that they can't perform so well in those physical tests because the system is broken. It has nothing to do with the fact that women simply aren't as strong and as fit as men.
Yeah. Or indeed, well, it's not even that problem. It's just that if you lower, like, so many people apply to the military as well, and so many people don't get in. It's a volunteer military, which allows us to have rigorous standards and that sort of thing. That's the idea. So for instance, for my job, I was told on day one, congratulations, you got here. You managed to come in over the top of perhaps up to 3,000 other applicants who were going for your job and they didn't get it because you were better. So you're going to do a good job for us because you've put this work in, we've invested in you, and we expect the best from you. So that there's that kind of pedigree there, this kind of like expertise. And again, in a similar way, I was looking at I'm trying to look at doing my declin end of next year, which is the equivalent to a PhD in clinical psychology, right? And they reckon that out of that, for every one position, there's 1,000 unsuccessful applicants, right? You need to be really on top of the game. And I just find that it's staggering, really, that you would lower the bar to such a degree in such a desperation, because obviously the number of women who are applying to the military, just going back to that example, the number of women applying to the military is far less than the number of men applying. The caliber of the women is going to be roughly the same distribution, and there are women in the military. I used to know a fantastic colleague called Kim, who was more ripped than half the guys I ever met, who absolutely smashed her job. I think is now gone on to be a bit of a tracksuit soldier. She'll probably end up as on one of these posters as the face of the Air Force at some point. And nothing but respect for her. She's really good at this sort of thing. But at the same time, you had people who I know. There was this one girl. For the sake of argument, I'm going to call her Georgie, right? Because that's what to avoid giving a real name. Should anyone actually know me out there, and she failed her fitness test 4 times. She failed her leadership exam 4 times. She ended up with a D rating overall. A D rating would normally get you kicked out of the Air Force. And she is a serving member today in an office environment because they couldn't find a place for her with any other real responsibility. But nonetheless, she is in the Air Force doing that job. Much to the chagrin of all the women who are very frustrated with the women who get in doing that. So if you have 100,000 male applicants and, as they say 1,000 of them get in, and then you have 10,000 female applicants and 100 of them get in because it's the same distribution, it's one of those things where you're just going to have to take the fact that you've got 10 times less female applicants. You don't take 1,000 female applicants, at which point you've got all the chaff with the threshed wheat.
Daft thing is that logic is so easily broken. So you go, okay, so the only difference, let's take the military context, the only reason that difference can arise is because of bigotry. Okay, there you go. Have a 200-pound Bergen and go and lump it 40 miles. And guess what? Or better yet, let's give you a weight that you can actually carry. That's okay, but then you don't get all the food, ammunition, and water that you need.
Yeah.
You can break that narrative so easily. It's almost childlike.
Yeah.
The frustrating thing with it ignores perfectly valid science there. The big one to my mind is the IQ question. Obviously, roughly 10% of the population cannot be used by any Western military at their level of IQ contribution. So you kind of go, well, so hang on. So we've got a bunch of people that are going to be underrepresented here, i.e. the perhaps lower end of the IQ spectrum. the only explanation is bigotry? Really?
Let's also go back to your Bergen example when you're talking about carrying heavy things for long distances, because they did originally try and do it. The first thing that they noticed was that I'm trying to remember the name of the injury now, but basically to do with hips, because it's like because their stride is too short for
Yes,
what is
they got
expected.
injury on the it's where the hip bone starts to misalign with the hip socket, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. So
Can't think of
basically,
the name of it now.
yeah,
But
they basically got these striding injuries, and so it first of all that caused them to change policy so that now instead of so for people who don't know if you've got for goodness sake a squad for lack of a better word, we call it a flight in the military in the RAF.
Let me guess. All the men now had to take shorter strides.
No, 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 no. So what ends up happening is what it used to be is because of the way that you end up. Oh, for goodness sake! Like all my jargon has gone out of my head for the time being. But basically, the way that you form up, you have the tallest people are on either side, and then it basically does a curve down in the middle. It's like a semicircle with the shortest people in the middle. Now we have that happens, and then the three shortest people in the entire flight move to the front of the queue, so that the shortest people are setting the stride length, basically. But this is not great when it comes to trying to make, shall we say, record times round pacing laps and stuff like that for exercises.
Well, I just hope from the thing you told us just before, with people with D ratings still continuing on, I just hope that the people with a D in aircraft maintenance don't get to maintain aircraft.
Most of those people end up being sidelined onto courses that their commanders know that they can't complete, and so they're out of their hair for the next 6 months or whatever. Whilst they repeat the course 3 times, then they get shunted back into whatever logistics job it is that they're actually doing. We had a chap called Andrew who was like that, where he was just basically too thick to even do a loggy job. Nothing against loggies, but like he couldn't even do a stores job where he was basically giving out booze.
loggy is not the most complex job overall.
It's not the most complex job. And
Well,
he
I
couldn't.
I just mean to say, I think that any pilot getting into his jet would like to know that the engine has been maintained by someone who doesn't have a D in.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, but and again, these are officers, and it's no wonder. Like when you dilute officers with direct entrant, like so, there used to be a thing where you couldn't direct entrant into officer. There was like this magical period that some of the older soldiers remember between buying your commission and having to have gone through whatever branch it was or trade before applying for an officer position. Then they decided that because they had put a hold on recruitment and they had actually cut far too many people far too quickly, and they had a massive deficit of experience, that they needed direct entrant officers. So that's
because that worked so well with the police.
So that's what I ended up doing. I went in direct entrant officer, and but the number of people who then get shafted because you then have this point of fault, effectively another point of fault where the officer class is basically dependent on the MOD's requirements as opposed to its own requirements, if that makes sense, because the MOD is setting overall recruitment targets, which it allows them to fall for all of this discrimination bias bollocks. It's a huge problem.
Well, to be fair, there is such a thing as discrimination and bias. The only problem is no one knows what to do about it, and whether or not it's an inherently bad thing there's both good and bad bias. But this is one of the funny things. We've been having this conversation in my company in the last couple of days. All the stuff that you do in terms of counter-bias training has been shown now by a total of 3 studies to actually produce more bias.
Yeah. And it just goes in a different place. It's just more bias.
Move the bias down the line in the case of, say, hiring people.
It's also like the big problem is that all the implicit bias stuff, which is still all the rage, despite even the creators of the particular test that they use saying you are misusing. No, we didn't mean for it to be used this way. You're misusing our test. It doesn't predict the things that you want. And I mean, like obviously your favorite bugbear binary being the McPherson report, and how they basically looked at people's implicit biases but not their work rate compared to those implicit biases, for instance,
Yes.
And so you don't know whether or not someone who really hated the blacks was actually the peak of professionalism in his job. Otherwise, it's very like it's infuriating. Just this idea that you're criminalizing feeling aside from anything else, and you basically remove the concept of professionalism entirely from your lexicon, because there can be no such thing. If you're not discriminating consciously, you're doing it unconsciously, and therefore you're a bigot no matter what.
Yeah. This whole slave to one's instincts type thing, which if you argued it the other way around, would obviously be seen as massively, well, pick your ism here.
Yeah, pretty much. Okay. So we've already covered this. New IKB 4472 says, in short, leave the railways to the railway people. Well, that was half an hour ago. But yes, I think he's referring to our ministers and who should be in charge of what. So thank you for that. And again, same person says, how to break the anti-discrimination BS. Get involved in another large-scale conventional war. OST front size and operational intensity should cut it. OST front size. OST? Do you know this acronym, Binary?
Not familiar with it. I would imagine he's talking about where you try and grow the military to its largest possible recruitment size.
Possibly.
That's the first thing you do in a major conflict is rank up in anticipation of casualties, isn't it?
Mm. If you don't know you're a bigot, you're a bigot. Catch 22 from chat. Yeah. But the other thing is that like people who don't realize that they have biases, but there's the people who say, "Oh, I know what my biases are," and it's like, yeah, that's good. And therefore, I know what your biases are. No, that's a bit more of a leap, isn't it? If you're using your biases to justify my biases, it drives me mad with this whole well you're just the biggest argument and fallacy that I see come at me time and time again is like, someone said to me the other day, oh, you don't know anything about the female experience, Mark, therefore you can't talk about it. And I said, by that same logic, you know nothing about the male experience, Sally, therefore you can't talk about it, so how dare you call me a misogynist? Basically. And I've been waiting for so long to say that to someone, and the look on her face was absolutely priceless.
It is quite depressing, that view of the world, isn't it? When people
Yeah.
take that all one or nothing. There's nothing in between.
Ost equals Eastern Front, World War II. Apparently, that's what I mean. My bad. Yes, should have known that one. Speaking of World War II, I've been rereading. What's it called? Something of the Few, Land of the Few. No. I've been reading this book by a chap called Max, and I can't remember his surname. This is what illness does to me, folks. Apologies. But basically, it's a story of Battle of Britain pilots and their stories, as well as some accounts from the Women's Auxiliary Air Force and other associated branches.
I think the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, another one of those branches that by now, given how saturated we have been with talk of how women flew Spitfires in the war, is one of those things that just elicits groans out of everybody, which it shouldn't. But this is exactly one of those examples where it has been used for a purpose to completely misrepresent something.
Yeah.
So much so that even the women themselves who were, the surviving women who were part of that auxiliary force kind of pointed out and said, but we didn't fight, we didn't fly in combat. But yes, one just likes to grasp at any straw to misrepresent things, and somehow, I mean, we've seen this in many sort of facets, the gays trying to basically claim every major figure in history was either gay or bi.
Well, it amuses me because when that happens, it reminds me of the old black activists in America. I say old.
The Al Sharpton.
The Al Sharpton crew, yeah, and that sort of thing. Who like Louis Theroux went out and interviewed, and they were basically trying to claim every historical figure was black,
Yes. Yeah.
or at
Jesus
least
Christ was black.
or descended from blacks, and it didn't matter if you were white or not. If you could prove that your heritage was sufficiently black enough, you wouldn't be genocided in the millennium when the second coming was, or whatever it was they believed at the time. It was
Yes, and of
crazy.
course also the Roman Emperor was black, and you just sort of think to yourself, actually he was North
Oh
African.
yes, Julio
This-
Caesar. Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, and of course then that goes into the whole we was Kangs thing, isn't it? Where Egypt was entirely black.
Oh yes,
And you just go, well, something significant must have changed since.
yes,
in
because they're
Egypt.
not anymore.
Yeah. And that is one of the sort of gripes that I always like to put forward in that, that sort of politically correct language that the Americans sort of adopted decades ago, African American. And you just go, okay, so Egypt, pretty much one of the oldest civilizations on Earth,
Yeah.
situated in Africa, and they don't fall under that category. So you would already think that one would spot the flaw. But yes, they effectively would be something like Middle Eastern American or something like that, would they not?
Oh, whatever.
Even though they so clearly are African American,
yeah.
any
By
descendant-
definition.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Hey, all!
Oh my
Wild
god,
Games
what on
here.
earth is going on? Sorry, something just linked in my chat, and people in the stream are going to have a really weird sound clip just come through on their stream. Yeah. The concept of African American in general, anyway, at this point is entirely redundant. I mean, when was the last time they lived in Africa? It's been a long time.
There is the uncomfortable question that I find strange because it is never asked, which is, when it comes to slavery, hideous as the whole story was,
Yeah.
if you are an African American, as they like to call themselves, descended from said slaves,
Yeah.
and you see the slavery as, this terrible thing, where would you sooner be? So, would you sooner be the descendant of slaves that now lives in the richest country on earth? Or would you sooner be in, I don't know, Togo or
I think it
Ivory
so,
Coast?
So when it comes to the African American identity as a whole, I can understand because of the way the records were lost and the lineages were lost, why it was important for them to forge like a new cultural identity out of the bonds that they shared. At the same time, in response to your question, I think it's more important that we remember that in terms of human liberty, it's not about whether descendants would rather be or whether they would even exist at this point. It's more about the removal of freedom that was...
At all, or...
We are reconnecting everything. Hopefully... Excellent connection. I can't wait for all the...
There are lots of Fs in the chat.
Many Fs.
Coming towards the end anyway.
Not that I have any idea what the F meme actually means, where it originated
So in
from.
in a video game, British, in one of the Call of Duties a couple of years ago, one of your teammates gets killed in the opening, and the entire sort of homage to him being killed, the entire mourning period is where you stand next to his coffin and press F to mourn.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and that was that. We're back. Sorry, folks, not entirely sure what happened there. From what I could tell, I thought I was sitting out the window. I was seeing this ominous orange glow, and I genuinely thought that one of the flats down the road was on fire. Briefly, but it just seems to be like some bizarre internet reset. So
You wouldn't by chance have any cladding on your building, would you?
oh god, I hope not. Just the inflammable kind, right? I went.
Did you hear of that cladding fire in Bolton just these last few days?
Yeah, happened again, didn't it?
Did you hear what the cladding was made of?
No, I didn't.
Apparently, it was some kind of wood and compressed wood and paper substance.
What?
That wouldn't
and you just
surprise me.
and you just sort of wonder, what on earth are they thinking putting this stuff onto buildings?
Well,
I
it's
just
not designed to be exposed to anything other than wet and cold, basically.
Mm-hmm. Horrendous. Right. Where did I cut off for you guys?
I don't know, but I was going to say
no
just
idea.
apparently all that cladding's RIBA approved, Royal Institute of British Architects.
Oh, I mean, the one in Grenfell Tower was approved. I mean, everything has always passed with flying colours.
It's always
Um,
legal. Yes.
Yes, I mean, otherwise it would never have been put on. You know, I think when it came to the cladding in Grenfell Tower, they had the choice between that and something else that would have been more safe, but both of them had the same fire safety rating. So they took the cheaper option, which, I mean, I think anyone would do.
The power of the risk assessment. Yes.
Yeah. So, when you then come to effectively pretty much gluing papier-mâché to a building, which more than likely has some kind of plastic coat on it or whatever, you do begin to wonder what the thought process behind that is.
Yes.
To be fair, it wasn't the only problem with Grenfell there.
Yes,
There are many other problems with it.
Yeah, there was a multitude of stuff, but nonetheless, there is a sort of a thing, as in, okay, so you're beautifying a building, but at the same time you're unwittingly turning it into a death trap, because there is a sort of a series of misunderstandings down the whole chain, from the fire brigade doing fire and safety checks, to people misunderstanding the materials, to planning permissions, and so on. Because one of the things I find always a bit unfair towards the council is that one tries to make out that they were kind of treating these people as disposable or expendable, if you know what I mean. Well, they just spent £10 million updating the tower. That doesn't strike me as kind of treating people as expendable. It's just that, yes, it was almost a comedy of errors, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, down to stuff like the fireproof doors that should have a degree of compartmentalization being blocked open, or in some cases, apparently even taken off the hinges by the residents. I mean,
and
my personal favourite, though, is
gas
David
pipes.
Lammy inventing conspiracy theories out of it.
Yeah, and open gas pipes running around the corridors. Yes.
Yes, it was clearly designed to be a chamber to murder minorities, wasn't it?
Well, that was basically his allegation, wasn't it? That the police and the fire brigade were covering it all up. There'd been hundreds more deaths. They said it was just hilarious to see David Lammy go full 9/11 truther on it. I was expecting to hear stuff about thermite and steel beams. Not
Jet fuel doesn't burn steel cladding, that sort of thing. Oh, God.
Have I answered that one before?
Possibly. Mighty Balzac says, is Charlize Theron African American?
Well, according to what I read on a Count Dankula tweet, now everyone is African American. They only need to choose to do so.
Oh yes, we're getting to the point of transracial, and I saw a couple of memes about this in the same way that people decided to become Pastafarian, just to own the religious types.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're getting the transracial. There's also the transabled movement, the people who are choosing to become disabled by choice, because these are the kind of people who have an unhealthy attachment to the idea that they want to detach their limbs from themselves, or at least travel around in style in the latest wheelchair, with their legs strapped up like they've got multiple sclerosis or something.
Because they were born with the brain of a disabled person in an able body.
Apparently, I mean, it's just it's a lifestyle choice at the end of the day, and the difficulty is that they are using the same logical framework that obviously all the trans activists have been using.
Yeah, and this is precisely what I was touching on earlier. This is where the whole thing is coming to a full stop. the whole thing breaks itself down. There is no way that this can travel much further, and it is saturating society in such a way that there will be a reaction towards it, because you can't keep pushing such complete nonsense and expect the population by and large to just shrug and go, oh well, yeah, if that's the latest fashion. It just won't happen.
I'm waiting for the first mid-debate identity switch in order to back up certain points. It's like, for the first 20 minutes I shall identify as a woman, then for the next 20 minutes after that I shall identify as a black woman, then the next 20 minutes after that I shall be a black disabled trans woman.
Did you see that clip that made the rounds on Twitter? There was two women. Well, I'm assuming they're women, talking to a class of school kids.
Okay.
And they were kind of doing this talk on trans, and you could, how shall we say, you got the gist from the kids that they were somewhat confused as to what they were being told, and they had these little signs to hold up, red or green.
Yeah.
According to whether they thought yes or no. And obviously they got it wrong when they were asked, well, if such and such, would that be a man or a woman?
Yeah.
Most of them put up, green as, it would be a man. Oh well, no, it isn't necessarily so. And they were effectively being told within that clip that one could be this or one could be that. The fact that one was born this way doesn't really matter. In fact, it might actually change during the day.
Yes, this was the same. This was the same two who brought in a pink and a blue naked doll. Wasn't it? They brought in these
that might well be.
They brought in these mannequins, and they would basically just like, do you think it's a boy because it's got balls and a penis, basically? Yeah.
I think I just worked out how to kill all female shortlists.
Go on.
Bunch of people who are clearly men, like you, me, Britisher, etc., register on an all-female shortlist. And
did you just assume my gender binary?
I did. Fuck. All register on it and just say, yeah, we identify as women. What are you going to do about it? Do you want to be a bigot and say we're not?
Say, well, first you had
record, a bit like the world record breaking female weightlifters and wrestlers.
Well, unfortunately, they have the ultimate counter to that as well, which is, in order to register for this all-female shortlist, you must also be a member of the Labour Party, which is something I'm not going to do.
To be honest, I'd view cutting off my cock as less uncomfortable than that.
Oh, I'm sure.
But no, I mean, with that clip, imagine yourself. Think back in time. Think, you're about 10 years old. Two women walk in and tell you that you might be a boy in the morning and a girl in the afternoon.
Ridiculous.
Yeah,
I mean, and not to mention that
would not compute, would it?
And for kids, that's obviously going to be the most confusing thing as well. Absolutely horrendous. I still consider it to be child abuse.
I mean, I remember some ardent feminists trying to get us boys at school to knit, which I assure you had hilarious results.
Oh yes,
because we were incredibly interested in knitting, as you can imagine.
Oh, it's one of your favourite pastimes even to this day.
Yes, yeah. So I think it is fair to say none of us, not one single one of us, came out of that able to knit anything, nor interested ever in knitting anything.
Yeah.
And it can, you can embark on these entirely futile efforts, which are sort of driven entirely by ideology. So maybe people are getting a flavour of the fact that I was exposed to ideologues from an early age, and it didn't work out well.
Mm. Well, on that note, folks, unfortunately my voice is going, primarily due to this illness. Otherwise, I would continue this at length, but unfortunately on that time, it is time to end. I'm really sorry, everyone. I'm going to have to alter the title of the stream, as no Sarah has appeared, but there's nothing I can do about that, unfortunately. Thank you all for bearing with us, me in particular, and we will catch you all next week. Any closing remarks, either Britisher or binary?
I think you should wind Sarah up by claiming she was on the stream. and faking some like rabbit
And,
news.
and it just didn't say anything for the entirety of the
Just by
stream.
like attaching like a rabbit's head onto porn bodies and stuff, just to wind up. Sorry, Sarah, you did ask for it.
I'm just disappointed you are not wearing your updated avatar today, Binary.
I didn't think to change it honestly because AA normally uses Streamlabs. Otherwise, I would.
Amusing.
I think I committed to wearing it for 3 UOs or whatever AA chose in place. To be honest, it's not that wasn't the worst.
No,
one
we've all seen the worst ones. We've seen the worst ones. Right, but with that, I wish you all the very best of luck with this week, and until next time, everybody take care and have a good week.
Toodle-pip.